Barack Obama wrote a book called The Audacity of Hope, which I think may be why the Bush administration doesn't always get its due for being audacious. One of Bush and Cheney's most audacious capers, as far as I'm concerned, was deciding that they could get away with doing illegal stuff by simply having administration lawyers say that illegal stuff wasn't illegal anymore. One of their marquee legal enablers was John Yoo, a 30-something conservative at the Office of Legal Counsel in the Justice Department. Mr. Yoo is credited with having written much of the infamous and now rescinded 2002 memo that attempted to redefine torture to mean that pretty much everything short of organ failure or death was okay. Assistant Attorney General Jay Bybee signed off on that sparkling piece of legal machismo, and then Bush tried to make him a judge. Mr. Yoo also authored another memo the next year, also now rescinded, which essentially said illegal interrogation techniques are not necessarily illegal because of commander-in-chief power. In other words, because the president says so. That little voice that you're hearing in your head right now is the ghost of Nixon. When the president does it, that means it is not illegal. Well, here's where today's news comes in. Apart from bad policy, this strategy was outrageously bad law. Senior White House lawyers were essentially writing get-out-of-jail-free cards instead of advising the president on what the law actually said. New reporting from Michael Isikoff in Newsweek magazine indicates that some form of accountability could come soon in the form of a Justice Department report on the conduct of Bush administration lawyers. Newsweek's investigative correspondent and MSNBC's newly minted contributor, Michael Isikoff, joins us now with the emerging details on this report. Michael, thanks for coming on the show, and congratulations on your new MSNBC gig. We are very happy to have you here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure, Rachel.
The John Yoo and Jay Bybee torture memos were criticized and rescinded by a Bush administration official. But now you're reporting that they are being assessed in some other way by the Justice Department in retrospect?
Right. About a year ago, the head of something called the Office of Professional Responsibility, which is the Justice Department's ethics watchdog unit, disclosed to Congress that it had been investigating whether or not the authorship of these memos met the legal standards, professional standards of Justice Department lawyers. And this has enormous consequences because, as I reported in Newsweek this week, this report was essentially complete by the end of the of last year, towards the end of the Bush administration. It had very critical findings about the work of John Yoo, of Jay Bybee, who, by the way, is a federal judge, and a subsequent chief of the Office of Legal Counsel, Steve Bradbury. The report drew strong objections from then Attorney General Michael Mukasey and his deputy, and it has not yet been made public. In fact, it hasn't yet been presented to Eric Holder, but we understand that if the report goes forward as it was presented to Mukasey, it recommends that the report be forwarded to state bar associations for possible disciplinary action against the lawyers, which would be a huge embarrassment, obviously. It finds that the entire legal edifice of Bush and counterterrorism policy was based on not just shoddy legal analysis, but unprofessional and potentially unethical legal analysis. Now, we have to be cautious here because we haven't seen the report. We haven't seen the basis for this, but the consequences of such a finding would be enormous, not just for those lawyers, but for the whole argument about whether there should be a truth commission or continued investigations. Remember, the pushback against that has always been, well, there were valid legal memos from the Justice Department that justified waterboarding. And now, if these legal memos are called into question, that changes substantially the equation.
So if the argument against prosecuting anybody for torture is that people were acting in accordance with these memos that told them it's okay, if it turns out that those memos are bunk, that might get their authors disbarred or something, does that actually materially change that as a legal defense, though, to prosecution, or does that only change the political calculation about prosecuting people?
Well, it certainly changes the political calculation, and it probably does not change the calculation for, say, CIA officers who were relying on these memos. But what's really interesting about this report is, and this investigation is, they just didn't reach a legal conclusion. I talked to a number of Bush administration lawyers who had been questioned as part of this, and they said that the OPR investigators who did this report got internal emails, internal drafts, back and forth correspondence with the White House to reconstruct how these memos came to be crafted. And if, in fact, it's shown that essentially senior officials in the Bush administration at the White House and others were dictating and in collusion with the lawyers for the Justice Department to sort of, predetermine what the outcome was, then, in fact, the look into how these memos could go elsewhere, could go beyond just the authors of these memos into the people the clients that they were seeking to please.
That would change the entire political argument about whether or not they did what they did because they'd been advised it was legal versus doing what they wanted to do and then getting the legal advice to back themselves up.
Right. If they were said, here's the opinion we want, go find us a justification to do it, then that's a different kettle of fish.
Michael Isikoff, MSNBC contributor and Newsweek investigative correspondent. This is a fascinating story. Thanks for joining us, Mike.
Thank you.